Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Simplifying Maximo for the End User. My name is Betsy Ambrosius, and along with me leading our webinar is Chris Winston, Project Admin and Project Manager. Today, Chris will cover steps to simplify Maximo, guidelines for backups and updates, and show you all specific examples. Before I turn it over to Chris, just some reminders. This webinar will be recorded and all phone lines have been muted. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar by the end of the week, and we will be answering all your questions at the end of the webinar, so please submit your question in the field box. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Betsy. And just a reminder also, the slides that I have here are available for downloading now. I typically upload them before the webinar begins, so you can download them now or, of course, later or as we go. Today, we're going to be talking about simplifying Maximo for the end user. Specifically, we're going to be referencing and using Maximo 7.6.0.4 as part of the exercise as well. You know, I give you slides, lots of words, so you can use them later. Then we'll go into the examples using actual Maximo, and as always, it's probably too much stuff to cover in an hour, but we'll slug through it at any rate. So let's talk about our agenda. Remember, Maximo is a mature product. Over the last 20 years, it's been scaled up from a department solution to blanket many different types of enterprises with their multiple positions and roles. Maximo remains, however, flexible, sometimes too flexible. Today, we're going to discuss scaling things back or just handling things in a different way, utilizing the tools provided with Maximo to alter Maximo. Maximo's huge. Work order tracking, if you look at the main tab, it's almost 80 fields. Probably don't use them all. I'm not sure who actually does, but it's a lot to go through. So we'll talk about just the overall size of the application and things you can do to make it a little easier to use. I'm going to go over some guidelines. I'm going to give you an outline of steps. You don't necessarily have to proceed in the same order or even cover everything that I'm covering, but I want to make sure you understand these are options that are available to you, and again, within the product and tools provided with the product to alter it. And we'll go over some examples, and then we'll get into an actual demo. Just keep in mind, this is really all about making Maximo flexible and the fact that it is. So let's talk about some guidelines. Maximo is a long-term investment. It generally merits more than a production instance, and it's imperative that you have one for development and testing, even if you have no business requirement. It is simply an easier and safer way to go. Back up as you go. You know, you're making changes, you want to confirm them, you want to test them out, and test them again before you roll them out to production. As we go through this, you'll see a few skull and crossbones. They're just reminders of risk. Because yes, you can utilize the tools in Maximo to mess yourself up. You want to make sure you evaluate your needs, both short and long term. Maximo is pretty big, so security can be difficult. So you want to try and focus on the applications that a group needs to update first. If they need update rights to them, that kind of pretty well clarifies what you need to do. If you don't need it, just turn off the access. And then there's that gray area. What if they need to just look something up and they need more fields than what's in the common lookup and they need that hyperlink into the application? Well, if you can keep the added fields under 3 off the main object, it's probably better to actually modify the actual lookup. All your lookups are in a lookup XML file. You can export it, you can back it up yourself, make the changes, test it out, import it and test again. And in general, what you want to do is do one lookup change at a time. You know, you may have the need, you want to change asset inventory and locations, and you want to do them all. It's probably better to just do them one at a time, make sure they work, Takes more time? Sure it does. But generally it's a more sane process, and it can help you out long term in maintaining the application going forward. In terms of the overall steps, one of the things that you'll be looking at is just other resources that are going to be available to you. So you'll have some subject matter experts on the business side, yeah, and as an administrator, you're probably one of them. But you want to make sure you keep track of those folks, because odds are they have some day job that they need to get involved in on a regular basis, and then you're pulling them away from that to get them involved in this part of the process. This is important both to them and to you. So you want to make sure they are involved, committed, and get them involved on a regular basis. It's probably not going to be a one-time thing. Tailoring and configuration. You'll have a number of different options to you. System properties are kind of at the high level. They affect many, if not all, users, so you want to alter them wisely. Application designer. It's going to affect all the users for the altered application, and there's some options as well that you can focus on. The lookup XML is managed primarily through Application Designer, although you will go there to export it as well as to import it. You'll have a signature option toggle. I'm actually going to go and show you how that's done so you can see all the implications of it. We'll actually go ahead and create one and then show you what you can do with it. And then there are some times where it's useful to just clone the application or duplicate it. Then you may move into organization options, domains. Domains, those that come with the application, you also have the ability to add your own. And they're just a list of values to help standardize the input and making the data people key in or type in data they will actually select from a menu to make the code that's in the field essentially and effectively standard, which is good for analysis. And then there's security groups as well. I should take a look at that, particularly as it relates to signature option toggle and kind of where that actually shows up. Moving forward, quick reporting is an easy application to start with. So that's generally where we begin with this, but you can also use it on any application. There's usually a lot of people using it, so it tends to work out better. It's a good place to get a win early in the process. All right, so I mentioned the organization's options, kind of something you take care of later, but I'm going to talk about them now simply due to the fact that there's probably enough organization options for another webinar. Each of these actually breaks out into sub-areas and multiple options that are related to them, sometimes 10, 12, 15 options, sometimes just a few. I'm just going to talk about edit rules for a work order. Specifically, if you look at them in the organization application, edit rules basically just say that out of the box, the waiting approval rows you see is checked off. That's just the way Maximo comes. So when you create a work order and waiting approval status, you can make a lot of changes. When you approve it, your number of changes goes down. And of course, when you complete it, even fewer. When you close it, pretty much nothing. So the problem I occasionally run into, someone will have a issue where in their business process, the asset is assigned later in the process, assigned or corrected typically by the technician. Every once in a while I'll get a call and literally I had one, worst one, I thought I'd had my worst one already. About a year and a half ago I had a call, we looked at the database, they had about 25,000 work orders, about 18,000 of them did not have the asset number. It wasn't like their hierarchy wasn't filled out or flushed out. It's just that in the process, people will fly through it, and the asset number is typically available, but they cannot enter it. It really is just a matter of allowing the option in edit rules to change the location of the asset at another status besides waiting approval. Sometimes you may need to include the general ledger account in that, depending on your process. But again, the thing to keep in mind is where does it work for you in your process, and then you get an understanding of the types of changes you need to make within your organization settings. And it's really, again, heavily driven by your overall process. All right, domains. So you have a number of domains of different types that come. There are roughly 5 different types of domains. There's over 400 of them individually delivered with a product. I'm going to take a look at one. It's a slightly common variation, as well as one that's not even in there, but it's often added. Work order and other status domains are considered synonym domains. That is, they have a specific function in Maximo as opposed to a simple alpha or alphanumeric or numeric list. And their values cannot be altered. So waiting approval is delivered, and it's a status pretty much everywhere, and it will always be waiting approval. You cannot alter the code. You can alter the description, but you cannot alter the code. If you need another status similar to waiting approval, you can create a synonym for it. So the work order will behave in terms of what things you can edit based on that status. In terms of the synonym you write it and you tie it into an internal value. So as waiting approval, then you have a lot of things you can still do to it. If it's in progress, you'll have a fewer things that you can do. And then this is an example, a very common one is to create a status called maintenance complete, which basically says maintenance is done with the work. Someone else comes in and filters and looks at work orders and maintenance complete status, reviews them prior to making them complete. The reason there is it's effectively behaving as an in-progress work order, even though it's marked as maintenance complete. So again, you're just leveraging and in fact altering a bit of the behavior within Maximo. And again, you can set synonyms not just in work orders, but in any of the other statuses for PRs or POs or requests for quotation, assets, and so on and so forth. So it is something that's available, delivered with the product, the ability to make the change, and you can do so directly within Maximo. Another thing that's actually common, excuse me, is the work order priority, asset, location, criticality. They're all fields that are available in the application. They are delivered as just fields with no domain. So if you want to set a list of values that would be utilized in that field, then you have to build out the domain, associate the database configuration with the field reconfigure, and then you'll have that available to you. You probably need to modify an application designer as well so that the select value icon will be available to you to select those actual values. Now, once you have started using Maximo and then you want to roll in a domain, you're going to have to evaluate the data in the fields first to make sure that you're not causing yourself a problem with this. But again, you have the ability within the product for the adding of a domain to an existing field, as well as if you configure and add additional fields, you can also associate them with the domain that is a list of values that you want to restrict people to using within that particular application and record. So let's talk about default configuration. The COTS, the commercial off-the-shelf, or the OOB, out-of-the-box version of Maximo. This is just kind of how work order tracking looks out of the box, and it's a standard demo work order from MaxDemo. Tried to squeeze a few things on the screen just to get more here without making it completely unreadable. There are changes that you can make to the application that just modifying some system properties and make it, in this case, make it fit a little better in a landscape view as opposed to a portrait view. Now, the thing to keep in mind, actually, let me just put these up side by side so you can see them a little bit better. And the thing to keep in mind is that the view on the left, the out-of-the-box view, where the labels in this case are vertical, can be helpful in cases where you have multiple language packs and the translations sometimes for the labels are longer. So it is this way for a reason, and it really kind of comes down in all cases of the changes is to really evaluate what is going to be best for your users in your environment. Another change that's made in this particular case, a lot of the common actions that are appearing on the left and out of the box are what had previously been actions on the toolbar. And since the toolbar has plenty of real estate, very commonly you find the need to push those to the toolbar, take them out of the common actions, and thus clean up the left side of the screen a little bit and redistribute things across the screen, and again leveraging the toolbar. Not always the case. And you have the option to maintain things in both places. So for example, you'll see the new icon and the change status icon appear in both places. These are all individual controls. We'll get into what those controls are, and I've got another slide to kind of help you out with that, so don't feel you need to memorize all this stuff. Although at some point your memory will be very helpful. The labels I mentioned before, whether you choose vertical or not, again, it's just a property. All right, so what I've done, I've looked at, well, there's 670, actually there's more than 670 properties in my instance. For 7.6, and it's just Maximo. There aren't any add-ons there, no vertical solutions, no mobile, no sketch or anything like that. So yes, if you add other components to Maximo, you do in many cases get more things you can alter, including and sometimes more system properties to consider. So I'm giving you a shortcut here. These are actual partial names that you can use to filter out the list, so you don't have to look through all 670. You can just use the property name to filter, and it gets you down to 8. This live refresh column is not out of the box. That's just something I changed to make it easier for you to see. That these are live refresh, so no rebuild, no redeploy of the ear. You can actually make the change. General rule for me is typically make two changes, sign out and sign back in, confirm that they're there, and that's probably the easiest way to go about that process. I'd love to tell you that there's some standard configuration of these that should work for everyone, but the reality is there isn't. Every once in a while I think I know the best optimal, and then somebody comes along and says, well, that doesn't work for me, so I change it. It is something that you will need to evaluate in your environment. To help with that, this slide talks about at least 6 of those. The other 2 are a little bit different, but this talks about where these items are and how they will alter. So show queries on toolbar, for example. Out of the box, that's turned off, and it's fine because the queries are still available to you. There's a new icon on the screen next to the find, which gives you access to your saved queries and essentially all the menu bar choices. So all these, which is search menu bar, that's turned on for the previous version, and now you have a toggle to turn it off. Well, if you turn it off, then people say, well, where is it? So it is actually present on an icon next to the find box, and you still have access to all of it. So this just So turning off the search menu bar gets you a row. Tab breadcrumbs, typically now these guys are turned off and get you another row. So some people prefer to have that when they come onto the list tab to be able to see those. Again, it's your business. You need to determine which ones are going to work better for you. Navigation bar query limit, essentially how many queries you'll put onto the navigation bar before they'll get the option to pull up a list of queries. And that has to be managed based on the hide on nav bar property. If you've pushed a number of probably common actions, perhaps even some from the more actions, up to the toolbar using the show on toolbar property, then perhaps you can expand your query bar limit. All of these changes trying to make it so you get more of the screen utilized and fewer requirements to scroll left and right or up and down, and especially not both. All right, modified lookup. So in this case, we have a lookup XML that's been modified, asset description and location, typically what you get. So I've added serial, fair class, and type. This was actually from something that several years ago, or client, and multiple sites where a lot of the work they do, they are out in the field and their assets are not tagged. So they reference and confirm based on the serial number of the asset, and this just gives them a better way to go ahead and search for that while in work order tracking, and thus not requiring access to assets, and more importantly, giving them the access they need to the information in the application they need it in. So they don't have to hyperlink, do a search, and do a return. They can actually do everything they need to do right here in the work order tracking application. And again, my usual guidelines, if I can get it to 3 or fewer fields, and they need to be on the main object. So not a secondary field that's related to it, but in this case, assets, so it needs to be a field that actually exists on the main asset object as opposed to a related field. So you can use your own guideline. Generally, like I said, 3 has just been a good toggle for me, a good rule. But as you get through this, you'll make up your own. All right, so let's look at quick reporting again. The commercial off the shelf, out of the box, and again, this is without any system property alterations, and yes, this is pretty much the main application. Now, if I apply a couple system property changes and leverage the signature option, a quote-unquote toggle, if you will, then I get a chance to make some modifications and make the application usually a little bit easier. So you may notice, and some of you may have this set up already. Work type is added, and one of the crew fields is removed, and there's still room for improvement. Again, it's just really up to your requirements. In this case, it's also a security change. This user, for example, has no access to create a work order, which can be important if the business restricts work order creation. It should be noted that the user can create a follow-up work order, but not a regular work order in quick reporting. And again, this is now leveraging the feature and functionality within the application, again, as is delivered. So the new icon is not present. It's just not there or available. So they can process and find the work, do the work. They can actually approve it, put it in progress, complete and close in this particular case. So you have security in the back of your mind every time whenever you're involved in making changes within the application. So if we look at these in sort of a side-by-side comparison between the left side out of the box and the right side for some of the changes that have been made, um, the new quick reporting fits a little bit better on a wide screen. You can also make it a little bigger. And it is harder to see here in PowerPoint, so we'll look at that in the actual browser view, but I actually have modified the resolution so that it can be seen a little better. But if we take a look at the differences in terms of things that have sort of been hidden via the security toggle, the signature option in Application Designer, just created it and applied it to several fields. So essentially hiding them. So they're not really removed in Application Designer. And for advanced users who actually need them available, it's a security change, not an Application Designer change. So it's something that is done more readily. Doesn't require a reset or anything. It's just really just making change in the security, and the person needs to sign on and sign back in, because that's how they pick up their changes to security. Now, if we look a little further, in modifications of system properties, full access can be challenging for new users if they don't need it. So how many non-administrative users, for example, need access to attachment management options, Cognos reporting, especially if we don't have Cognos, deleting a work log, downtime if we don't report it, meter readings if we don't record them, etc. So as a part of this process in terms of altering the application, you also will get to a point where you still need to consider security. Things that people don't need to have, security allows you to simply take them away in terms of actions, and this way you can again and further make Maximo simpler and easier to use by the masses, and I'm sure you have quite a few people looking at it using the product. If we take a look at, for example, for a technician, same application, so again, here we're in quick reporting as, so in this case, a Maximo Admin. Now I've set this up for a security group. So same application, modified the security for what's most likely going to be needed for a technician. And so they have access to the application. In this case, well, you can't see the create, but the create follow-up, which would be available to them to create follow-up work orders, but they cannot create new work orders. They can save their changes. There's a change status as well. So there's some status changes that are available to them, but not new work order creation. And again, this is in the case where you have a business process that says that you regulate work order creation differently. In other cases, people will expose new work order creation to the technician and allow them to create the work orders for, in many cases, the work that came up, especially emergencies that they did, and then need to come back to Maximo and report what was done. So again, your business requirements will dictate a number of the changes that you will make. If we look at inventory, very similar. Not all of the inventory functionality is available in the inventory application. It's somewhat restricted fields as well in some cases. It's really, again, trying to get in front of the person the things that they need to have and dispose of the things that can cause confusion, particularly if they're not used. If there's something that you don't use in the application, as remember, Maximo continues to be enhanced, more functionality to be put in place. It does not mean that you need to use it all, and it does mean that sometimes it can be confusing, and if you want to try and manage the process to get you the optimal set of information, you will alter the application. If we look at purchasing, in this case, a user has access to create a requisition as well as approve it, but in this case, their approval access only goes up to $1,000. This one's $3,900, and they get a security message. So yes, you can alter the application to make it simpler to utilize. Again, still need to keep in mind security, and security rules will still be in place in spite of the application alterations that you make. So you'll just need to, again, always consider those as part of your process. And I mentioned earlier, in some cases we run into a business that does not want work orders created in quick reporting because they go straight to in progress. So in this case, we have a work request application. It is a clone, a duplicate of work order tracking, and utilizing the signature option, the quote-unquote security toggle, that's been applied to work order tracking, or to this work order tracking clone, labeled here work order request. It is dramatically smaller, not even close to 80 fields on the main tab, and no other tabs. And you can have other modifications. You may want to be able to plan labor, so you add the plan labor section onto this. You have that capability delivered with Application Designer to make those types of changes in the clone application, and those changes go forward when you upgrade, so you don't have to redo them. So it's just something to keep in mind if again your business manages work order creation in that way. So you don't want work orders created in quick reporting because you want them to go awaiting approval status, so you can have a work order request application, or you can use a standard service request and build them out to work orders, although that sometimes requires additional manpower or an escalation that's automated to convert service requests to work orders, or some combination thereof. So, again, Maximo remains flexible, and there really is just no other way around it other than to say that. So, just kind of as reminders, we'll get into the demo in a minute, but you want to make sure you've got that sandbox development. We're actually going to go into my sandbox, so I make changes to it. I make changes to it all the time as a way of testing them out before I move into any other environment. It is a useful thing to have and to do. Make the backup. Some of the changes, sometimes there are changes you can make, and you can make a backup yourself. You don't need to contact the administrator and do a full database backup. Screen changes, you can export the applications XML, the lookup XML. You can back those up yourself. You don't need to have a full database backup if it's really something you're working on the sandbox. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing I would remind you of as well, when you have multiple environments, periodically, especially if you have multiple people working in your sandbox, you'll need to coordinate that. But more importantly, you'll periodically need to take a copy of production and overlay your sandbox. Get your latest changes that are in production, and oddly enough, your latest data. And sometimes it's the data that's actually the more important component of the change, particularly in cases where people started to use other applications that had not been used in the beginning when you first had your last copy. So it's just something else to keep in mind as you're going through and utilizing the product. All right, so demonstration. Let's see. I got one more slide, but we'll come back to that. Let's see if I can get into Maximo. Timed out, of course. All right. And who am I? Okay, remember my password. That's always a good thing. Doesn't always happen. All right, so where do we want to go first? So let's take a look at work order tracking. All right, we'll go this way. And we will just display a list of records. So a couple things I want to talk about here. Um, the tabs are showing. So this change has been made to actually show the tabs, the tab breadcrumbs, if you will, on the list tab. Out of the box, these do not display until you actually select a record. What you don't see is the menu. You can run the query simply by clicking on it, and then that will run your save query. So this will allow you flexibility. Now, the issue comes in is, well, when is that appropriate? So a couple places. First, sometimes people will dispose of their side navigation. This way, having the queries up here and available, can be very useful. But more commonly, if I can remember how to get back to the Start Center, in the case of using every place, going to the mobile Start Center where things are a little bit bigger, when I am going into an every place application, I don't have a side navigation option. It's just not there. And it won't be there because that's not something that's going to be available to you in every place. However, if I have exposed my queries via the property, then I can still run them from here. And additionally, I still have my view manage queries as well. So I still have access to them if I choose to remove the icon that displays a list of queries. So again, these are all options that you'll need to choose in terms of what you're going to do within the application and how you will essentially optimize it for all users. All right, let's go back to work order tracking, cover a couple other items. So before we start making changes. So I'm going to take a look at the work order. And again, in this case, I'll talk about the changes I'll make. I'll dispose of the query again. I'll probably get rid of these guys off the list tab, but you'll still be able to see them on the main or any other tab. We'll make the labels horizontal. And we'll also make a change. So here you see I can alter the asset because this guy's awaiting approval status. However, this work order is in progress. I can't alter the asset. So let's go ahead and take care of that first. So we'll pop in organizations. I'm using North America stuff and edit roles. And I'm just going to say in progress, let's have, what the heck, let's do GL2. All right, its record's been saved. So let's go back to work order tracking. And we'll display our list. And we see we still have access here. We scroll to the next record and it is now available. This is really true live refresh. You can see just organization option, you don't need to sign out. But again, you make this type of a change based on evaluating your business process. Technically, this is an organization level change. So your work order edit rules, if you have multiple organizations, they don't have to be the same. They can be different. And again, it's your business. Make it work for you. All right, let's change a couple system properties while we're at it. Where did we go? Where's system properties? There it is. And let me get back to my shortcut. Well, actually, which ones are we going to do? Let's see, we said vertical, labels. Actually, let me go ahead and get back to that slide. And I'll just go ahead and grab the changes I need to make. If I can find the darn thing. There's a lot of stuff in here. There it is. All right, so I'm going to grab all of these. I will simply paste them in here. and my 670 number dwindles quickly to 8. A much more manageable list. And let's see, we're not going to alter a query limit. Oh, query limit and recent applications. Those are two things that were not in the slide, and I'll talk about those when we're back in the application. So let's see, we'll go ahead and we'll take the search menu bar and change that. Show on toolbar queries. We will change that as well, and vertical labels, and we'll change that. So we'll save them, and let's see, what did I change? Actually, since I don't remember, scary stuff, here we go. By doing that, I now can see here's a change, here's a change, and here's a change as well. And Maximo knows it, pays attention to that. Now I'll go ahead and say live refresh. I will sign out and sign back in. So I got the password right, I did. And work orders, work order tracking. And there's my list. I've now restored the search menu. My queries are gone, and my labels are now horizontal instead of vertical. And again, there are other things that you'll need to look at in terms of the application. For example, if you're a single site and you operate at one address information, it's probably not all that useful. There's probably not anything there, and yet it's taking up real estate. So you can choose to hide this or minimize it directly in the application, or actually modify an application designer using a security toggle and then just actually hide it from display or from use. Again, something else that you're doing to make Maximo easier to utilize. All right, let's talk about our domain. So status. In our statuses, we want to add maintenance complete. It's not here. So we are going to go to domains. There's a lot of them, 435, no, 479. Okay, we just want one. And we're going to add, our internal value is the standard value that's in Maximo, which in this case, INPRG for in progress. We're going to make maintenance complete MCOMP. And hit OK. Oh, did I already do that? Oh, it's already here. Well, look at there. So let's do a different one. Let's make a synonym for waiting approval. And we're going to call it plan. And we give it a nice long description so we know what it's for. And the synonym has been modified. We will step out and back. And we'll go back and work order tracking. We'll grab work order 1000, which is in waiting approval status, and we will change it to planning. So the status change is recorded. The different status code is now available for filtering. Your planners can look for those work orders. They don't need to look at waiting approval work orders. They need to look at those that are planned. So again, as is useful, those are the types of changes you can make within the application. And I'm running out of time. So let's do one more security toggle. Let's go ahead to Application Designer. And I'm glad I did this before. I made a short version of purchase requisition, but I didn't really alter it. I guess I should show you that first. So purchase requisition short. And I'm really just going to make a short version of this just because a lot of people that will create, they work on the PR and the PR lines, ship to terms, conditions, log specs, they don't really do anything with. They may do something with the log, but maybe not. And on the lines at creation time, I don't think we mess with the distributed piece. I want to hide that as well. So I'm going to go into Application Designer, look at PR short. First thing I need to do is add a signature option, which is future in that case. And then I'm going to say for future use and hit OK. And it's in there, and now I'm going to take specifications, properties, advanced, future. So what does this do? So what this does, the addition of the signature option places that signature option into each security group. Applying this signature option to this tab then hides this tab from all users in that security group unless that checkbox is checked for that security group. And to make this a little bit more dramatic, I'm going to hide it a little bit more. So you'll note application isn't really changing. So for those people that need to have access to it, they still will, simply by making sure that that checkbox is checked in their security group. And on PR lines, I'm going to dispose of the distributed, or at least hide it. So we will take, there it is, and is there anything, oh yeah, and then that guy, the icon as well. And of course, autocomplete does work. So we'll go ahead, get that guy in there. Back in we go. Jeez, who thought of these passwords? It's huge. All right, let's see. Let's go back into purchasing, requisition short. Looks a little smaller. And on the PR lines, the distributed guys are gone. I want them back. I'm not going to go ahead and mess with a toggle, but I am going to alter the security group for Maximo Admin, just me. And applications, filter, all right, I got it. And somewhere in here is a checkbox for future use. Check it, save it, sign out. By the way, I don't recommend using any more than one signature option. It will make life easier. The more you add, potentially exponentially difficult this can be. All right, my tabs are back. And the distributor field is back. So it does give you, again, that type of capability to flex and leverage the application. With that in mind, I need to go back to PowerPoint. So some things to keep in mind, and if you have questions, go ahead and ask them in the question section. Next webinar, searching and querying Maximo, and we'll talk about specifically things that you can do to help your end users leverage the query capability within Maximo. For example, Maximo writes a lot of the structured query language from the fields that you utilize in the filter and the advanced search. So we'll take a look at what that means, how you have access to it. We'll look at some special and perhaps non-intuitive functions that are available to you, and probably the most important thing is really extending advanced search. It gives you some greater capabilities to provide greater query capability to the end user without them having to know structured query language. A lot of it has been based on requests we've gotten for changes to be made, so it is something to keep in mind as you are going forward and utilizing Maximo as an application. And let's see, questions. Where did my question window go?
You did such a good job, Chris. I don't think there's no one wants to ask a question because you've answered them all during your demo.
Oh, okay. Well, they probably just didn't get around to it. Or there is a questions section. The other thing to keep in mind for the next or any time you register for a webinar, there's actually going to be a box for you to input questions you may have before webinar. If they're germane to that webinar, we'll try and roll them into what is covered in terms of subject matter as well as demonstration. If they are for another topic, then more than likely it will get rolled into a queue for a webinar at a later time. And if it's too technical for me, I will gladly roll somebody else under that bus. So, because there are some things that are just too technical for me. But one of the greatest advantages I have of working at Project is people who are smarter than me and who can address those items. And I do not mind asking them anything. It is one of the greatest things, I've said it for years, one of the greatest things about working here. Wow, no questions.
No questions.
That's pretty cool.
I will say those who are still in attendance, there will be a survey after you close out this webinar, and there will be an available field box in that survey that you will be able to input a question if you do have a question that you wanted to ask. If you think of a question at a later date, feel free to reach out to us. If you reply to the webinar invitation, I will get your question directly, and I will myself answer it or send it to Chris to answer. So I guess again, thank you, Chris, for doing the webinar. Of course, now we have some questions.
Okay, our domain synonym application specific. So, wow, sort of. So the question is, are domain synonyms application specific? Technically, yes, but it's not always that clear. For example, the work order status domain, synonym domain, is available in work order tracking, quick reporting, assignment manager. So it's not that a synonym domain will be restricted to one single application, but it will have presence in one or more. Can we ask questions before the webinar? So I think we addressed that. So yes, you can ask questions before the webinar when you register. There'll be a place for that. In fact, let me just show that. And of course, everything's stopping. All I want to do is open a web page. So right here, when you register, there's a little box right here for you to ask a question. And then, again, if the question is relevant to what's being covered in this particular webinar, it will definitely be answered. If it's related to something, say I had questions about before this webinar, one was on LDAP, which I couldn't even answer. So I need to get somebody else in that, and that's not part of what's being covered in this webinar, so it wouldn't be answered here. I've got to get somebody else to deal with that. But if it is something that is germane to this particular webinar, the topic's being covered, then yes, we'll get it rolled in. And I think that is now it. So hopefully that answered all the questions.
Yeah. Well, I think that concludes today's webinar. Again, if you haven't already, please register for the next webinar that Chris is going to do that you saw on his last slide, Searching and Querying in Maximo. And that will be on Wednesday, November 30th, so after Thanksgiving. So again, thank you, and look forward to having you all in attendance at our next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.